It's Friday, Feedback Friday, the feedbackiest day of the week. It's Feedback Friday in a very strange week, and Zelda's still sleeping in the co-pilot seat. I really need to move those papers, but she's comfy. So, you ever have that when a cat's on something and you're like, I should move that. And every time you go to move it, there's a cat on it and they look so comfortable, you can't bring yourself to move them. Some big news on Patreon this week. You gotta be a patron to find out what it is, though. Membership has its privileges, so help support this channel. Become a monthly patron, patreon.com/Leanna K. I know that's really like baity, but I don't know what else to say. There's some stuff that can't be purely public knowledge, but I've been given permission to talk about it to patrons. So be that as it may. Okay, moving in. This has obviously not been a normal week. And to try to do a normal Feedback Friday, I think isn't smart. Nerves are really raw. People are really stressed out. I spent a half an hour pretending to be a talking skull on Twitch on Tuesday just to try to distract people from the election. As I am recording this, there is still no result. There probably will not be a result by the time this goes live Friday morning, but who knows? Like, we're at that point. I think at this point, everybody's like, well, it is what it is, but it's still a distraction, right? And I gave the patrons my further thoughts about what's going on in the US right now, but I'm not going to do that publicly because this is a gaming channel. It's not a politics channel, right? So getting into the feedback for this week, the Johnny Depp stuff, I've kept covering it because I promised I would. I promised I'd cover the verdict. I'm not sure I'm going to continue covering this particular thing only because it's becoming less productive. My goal in making videos of that sort is to try to contextualize and provide support to people of all genders who are abused. I don't make that content so that I can become a punching bag based on a couple of words I used, which I still don't get why people have decided to attack the judge. I guess I should. I guess I should recognize that emotions run high on this stuff. I referred to the poor judge at one person at one point, and a bunch of people got on my case. And I'm sorry, nobody as a judge wants a high-profile case like this for precisely that reason. No matter how you rule, somebody thinks you're the devil. And so I believe in compassion. I believe in giving people the benefit of the doubt, especially when I'm going to be critical of something they've done. And if people don't like that, you're going to have to just keep not liking it, because that's the core of how I think. If you are going to judge someone harshly, you better be able to understand what it's like to be in their position. And too many people don't do that. And so everything becomes very dehumanizing. And I do think there were a lot of comments about the Duluth model, and I don't even know where to start there, because a lot of the stuff about the Duluth model and the issues with it and the limits with it and the flaws with it, yes, very valid points. I'm not seeing as much of that in that ruling as I'm seeing the stuff about addiction being something that the judge just, I mean, maybe he was pre-inclined to believe her because of some benevolent sexism. That's really possible. That's not The Duluth model is a framework, and yes, it's a problematic framework because instead of looking at, home situations and modeled behavior and addiction and a bunch of other things, previous abuse, it focuses exclusively on the whole patriarchy concept, and that's where it starts to become something of a problem. Sorry, I'm just fixing my camera because it's a bit. I had it off for Twitch because I was showing Scout playing on the ground with one of his toys. But people subscribe to models that fit their pre-existing biases. And there are still a lot of people, including in the courts, who subscribe to profoundly benevolently sexist attitudes, meaning you put women up on pedestals and so they have farther to fall. And I mean, okay, so the judge didn't need Amber Heard to be a perfect victim. He did kind of seem to think Johnny Depp needed to be a perfect victim. And that goes in to that benevolently sexist attitude that women are not responsible for what they do when there's a man involved. And this is something specific, specifically problematic about British common law. And it was something the original suffragettes back in first wave feminism were fighting against. The idea that, women were just so easily, discombobulated that if they committed a crime with their husbands, they weren't even considered criminally culpable because they weren't considered fully formed human beings. And a lot of those attitudes persist in one way or another. And you may think that's great for women. You may think that's a big benefit. Long term, big picture, it's very much not. It's very much the opposite. Because if you don't think a person is a fully formed human being, if you don't think an adult is an adult, then they can't do things, they can't do roles in society and jobs that require respect from other people, like being political leaders, for instance. And so it's disturbing to see, but to zero in on something like the Duluth model, which, let's face it, even the woman who came up with the Duluth model, what was her name? Ellen Pence. Even within her lifetime before she died, she pointed out that they kept trying to insist that, men were just doing what they did, conforming to patriarchal structures, and no matter how much they told these guys, oh no, this is really why you're doing this, you just can't admit it. They were like, no, that's not why we're doing it. And that, to me, shows that you only buy into these things if you have a previous bias in this regard. So no model in the world, especially since they've found that basically from what I understand, general consensus on the Duluth model is it's better than nothing. It's not a silver bullet, right? When it comes to domestic violence, there's a lot of reasons that these things happen, and they're not all solvable by anger management training, right? But you don't buy into that stuff unless you've already got an inclination in that direction. Most people, and this is not across the board, some people do change. Some people can change. I've seen it. A lot of people don't, because it's hard and because there isn't a ton of upside. And that's part of what's so difficult about addiction and mental health challenges. And we're just starting to understand how people's immediate social circles either help them improve or keep them stuck. immediate family, parents, siblings if they're close, significant others, that sort of thing. They say addiction is a family disease for a reason. And I mean, there are people right now saying Johnny Depp's done. He's just done. He'll never work again. Strangely, Sean Penn's still working, and we know he beat the crap out of Madonna. Um, and you know, there are people. I mean, Robert Downey Jr. had a lot of problems with addiction. He got under control and then played Iron Man. So Johnny Depp is very talented. Don't count him out. That's not my concern with him, because even if he can't get the big budget blockbuster movies anymore, he can go back to indie films because people will see movies because he's in it despite this. I mean, for all people think, oh no, it's the kiss of death. No, there are plenty of people out there, plenty of women who just don't give a damn. There's a ton of examples of that I'm not going to get into now because they wade into politics and not going there. Certainly not this week. But you know, he can still have a career if he wants one. I think that there are bigger things at play here. And I can't believe I have to say this, but I do. I am not saying I believe Johnny Depp is violent. I don't. I think there's more to it than this. I don't believe that a guy suddenly, unless he's had a head injury, you know, some sort of traumatic brain injury, somebody doesn't just become a domestic abuser in their 50s. It's very rare. Like I said, it's usually because of a traumatic brain injury. But he's clearly got problems in terms of drugs, drug use, and drug addiction. And perhaps he can do better now, now that she's not around, because his marriage to her certainly seems like a trigger. Though, I mean, maybe it's hard to say whether he relapsed and that's why he thought this relationship was a good idea, or he relapsed because of the relationship. But one way or another, something happened. And, you know, he clearly still has some work to do involving boundaries, especially involving women, because of his own, you know, his own family of origin and the dysfunction there. And I'm not saying that to judge him. I'm saying that, again, to be sympathetic. He's incredibly talented, and I hope that they're going to do the case in Virginia, which is a whole new ball game. The judge may let in very different evidence. They may consider very different evidence relevant. Keep in mind, it's a completely different legal system with completely different facts of the case. One person in the comments pointed out that people are treating this verdict as if it's this wide reference of something sweeping societally, and that's not what legal rulings are. Legal rulings are very narrowly focused, and that's all this is. That's all it ever is. And it's very important to keep that in mind. This was not a criminal case where they actually had to decide whether he was guilty of a crime. And because of the salacious nature of what's going on, I think that's where a lot of people are getting confused. They're deciding here whether a newspaper was in its rights to publish a particular story. And this is where we gotta be careful, because there are press freedom issues at play. You know, do we want a bad actor to be able to bully media through the courts to kill stories. And let me tell you, as somebody who had a few stories killed as a games journalist because I was told we can't afford the lawsuit, and it was cases of this nature, and they were evenly balanced portrayals of, well, there were problems at this company, and they're small companies. It's nothing big. Like, they're not even around anymore. They're well out of business at this point. But, you know, all parties behaved badly. No one was a saint. And I was just told, and this was way, way before Gamergate, like years before. And I was just told we can't afford the lawsuits. So, you know, it's really important that, and this is where the whole freedom thing sucks, the whole affirmative freedoms thing, not just about what a state can deny you, but what a state has to permit, right? The state has to permit some crummy stuff. Legal bar here, moral bar here. Laws are dependent. A just society is dependent on people behaving at a standard above the legal one. Does this always happen? No. The correct place to judge that is, you know, for most people among their immediate social groups. The problem now is that every so often one of these things just breaks away from that. And all of a sudden, a person who isn't used to it is in the spotlight of the whole world. And those always bother me. This case, I feel less bothered by because both the people involved are celebrities. And so they have given up an element of their privacy. One, by what they do for a living. Now, huge caveat on that. A celebrity does not completely give up their privacy, just less so. I'm aware of that. I'm aware just doing what I do, especially with TV. I gave up an element of privacy because of that, but not all of it. There's still lines. Certain things are relevant to my job. Certain things aren't. But you know, then they decided to air this out in court in a very, very public way, knowing it was going to be a matter of public record. And I think, ruling aside what most people I've spoken to think about it, is it was just an extremely ugly relationship between people who were really bad for each other. That's known. What's gone beyond that, there are very strong things pointing to her being abusive to him primarily or as well. The funny thing about invoking the Duluth model is if you actually strip the gender out of it and apply it to some of the dynamics we saw in that relationship, it lines up pretty well, you know, using emotional abuse and stuff like that. I mean, it's anyway, I'm gonna get off that, move on to the next. I'll you know, tie this off by saying people have the right to their opinions. You're not a great advocate for victims of abuse if you come at things in a hostile way. I predict there is going to be a lot of talking after the US election about how these hostile advocacy tactics are backfiring. That's my prediction right now. So, jumping on me because I said that poor judge, because, oh God, I dared to have some empathy for everyone involved. That's not my problem. So let's move on to the other thing, this Ellen Page movie that, since I recorded that, they've retracted that it's a Gamergate thing. Interesting. Okay. It's Apparently somebody linked me to, there are schools that have esports programs, which I find really interesting because based on that, again, I go back to the Title IX violations. If anyone of any gender is sexually harassed off of a varsity team, that's a Title IX violation. People can't have anything connected to an educational experience barred on the basis of sex. This is law. So why they're making a movie that it's so peak BuzzFeed, isn't it? Doing a movie that's the gloss of giving a shit, but is actually just cynical and kind of gross, right? Like, that's so BuzzFeed, isn't it? And that's maybe, and again, maybe this is because of my own bad experiences with outlets like Vice and BuzzFeed and The Daily Beast. And I have been left with the very real belief that they are not progressive outlets. They are shameless opportunists who have just chosen social issues as their current opportunity. They don't actually really at their core believe in a mission of making the world better. They believe in a mission of getting clicks. And I'm really surprised that they announced this after the whole Cuties debacle, because that was a mess. And I don't think anybody believes that went for Netflix the way Netflix wanted it to, though apparently Netflix subscriptions are back up, at least in Canada. I just saw a story about that today. But people gotta stop doing this. Like, I know that there is a lot of concern in media right now about getting eyeballs and getting attention and you know, new IP being harder to launch, and that's why we have all these revamps and reboots and retreads and sequels and reimaginings and all female this, all black that, right? That's the awesome thing about gaming, right? Despite all of that, new IPs keep coming out. Yes, we get a ton of sequels in gaming, but we also get new interesting IPs, and game companies are still willing to take those risks, thank God, right? And that's why I like this space. I think a lot of people take gaming for granted because they haven't worked in any other media, right? They start really super young, and oh, hello, bug. They start really super young, and gaming's all they know, and so all the bad stuff seems super awful. But let me tell you, as somebody who's done other forms of media, even with all this shit, it's still so much better than other forms of media. It is incredibly competitive. It is less cutthroat. It is, because it's a much more collaborative environment. And I think that hence the relevance of, you know, the whole Johnny Depp thing of human problems are human problems, and all the money in the world and all the fame in the world. Fame isn't power. And all the money in the world and all the fame in the world doesn't protect you from human problems, because you're still human. The problem isn't you're famous. You're not treated like a human. And I think that, you know, the only worst thing than an asshole is an asshole with money. Now, we don't know whether Amber Heard's the asshole with money or Johnny Depp's the asshole with money, or they both are, right? People have plausible reasons to think the things they do. But the point is that when people hit a certain amount of money, there's nobody telling them, stop, you are hurting yourself. I can't let you do this. They're just too powerful. They're too surrounded by yes men who see them as wallets more than they see them as people. And there are issues in gaming that we need to work out. But I've been saying for like 5 years now, before Me Too came out, we had Gamergate stuff. I was saying these fights are good because these fights mean the problems here aren't as ingrained. We actually give a shit about this. We're able to scream at each other over it. And one of the things I had in mind when I said that back in the day before the whole Me Too thing happened was, I mean, the Kevin Spacey and Bryan Singer things. I had heard about those even then. Weinstein was notorious. Not the depths of what he was doing, but the fact that he was a horrible asshole bully. Yeah, that was known. And, it was known that a lot of other things. And there was a reason I took the position I did. We can't let perfect be the enemy of the good. And too many people are. Too many people think, oh, we'll just point to the worst part of a given community, and every community has one, and judge the entire community based on the worst part. That's what's happening with gaming. Nothing. No sector of industry, no hobby, no group of people, no activist wing can stand up to being judged by its worst actors, by its worst people. Imagine if you're only judged by the bad people in your orbit and you're guilty of that by proxy. That's the whole problem. And I think that's why I remember one of the things that people told me during Gamergate, and I found it very frustrating at the time, but I listened anyway, is they glomped on to imperfect people and imperfect outlets, and that is very generous. Because at least they're listening to us. And I was trying to tell them at the time, they are hurting you by association. Yeah, but nobody else is listening to us. Well, I'm listening to you. Yeah, but basically you're not working for a big website outside of gaming that annoys and or frightens the people doing this to us. You're just a games journalist and not even at a big site. Kind of dehumanizing, very insulting. I don't think they thought it through, but that's part of the job, to sit there and get insulted so you get a useful kernel of information because people have lowered their guard and aren't totally realizing what they're saying, right? And what they were saying, and this is very apt, is that when people feel bullied, they line up behind who they think is a bigger bully. Because all they're thinking about is now. This is what, stress hormone and adrenaline and all that stuff does to the brain. It's just tunnel narrow now. Not thinking, system in a systemized way. Not thinking, okay, this may be okay in the short term, but long term, probably bad. People don't think that way when they're stressed because they just want the stress to go away now. And that is a human condition. That is, people don't make good decisions when they are stressed and depleted. Period. End of story. True for every human being on this planet. Let's just start there, right? I'm sure they'll be rebuilding, and I don't want to get too into it this week because, Lord, again, but so we'll leave it there. You know it's coming. Help support this channel. Become a monthly patron. Patreon.com/LeannaK. Thanks for watching.